Council's 2023 annual meeting. My name is Bob Mew, and I'm the board president of the Grafton County Senior Citizens Council. Thank you all for joining us today and for supporting GCSCC's mission to develop, strengthen, and provide programs and services that support the health, dignity, and independence of older adults and adults with disabilities living in our communities. I'll now call the 2023 annual meeting of the Grafton County Senior Citizens Council to order. Please let me mention a few housekeeping matters, which I hope will help the meeting flow more smoothly. Unless you'll be speaking, please ensure that your microphone is muted. If you wish to make or second a motion, or if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand, and when recognized, please identify yourself for the record and for the benefit of all proceeding. There will be an opportunity for questions and comments at the end of the meeting. The first portion of our meeting will feature a presentation about reframing aging, and that will be followed by our business meeting. At this time, I'd like to welcome and introduce our guest speakers, Jennifer Rabelais and Christopher Dugan. Jennifer is co-director of the Center for Aging and Community Living and project director for the Institute on Disability, both at the University of New Hampshire. She received a master's degree in psychology from Pepperdine University. She joined the staff of the Institute on Disability, New Hampshire's University Center for Excellence in Disability, in 2010, and provides leadership, project management, and facilitation across multiple projects focused on providing supports to older adults that allow them to live and age in communities of their choice. Jennifer has over 25 years of experience working on programs for older adults, individuals with developmental disabilities, as well as chronically and acutely ill populations in community-based settings. Her responsibilities have included program design, implementation, evaluation, and general oversight. Jennifer currently serves as coordinator for the New Hampshire Alliance for Healthy Aging and is a member of the board of directors for NAMI New Hampshire. Chris is an experienced public relations and marketing communications leader with broad and varied experience in providing strategic public relations, marketing, and development expertise with a broad range of nonprofits and other organizations. His skill set includes public and media relations, strategic marketing and communications, message development, executive communications, speech writing, crisis communications, development and fundraising, special event planning and execution, social responsibility communications, internal communications, and community relations. Chris currently works part-time as the communications associate for the New Hampshire Alliance on Healthy Aging. As principal of his own consulting firm, Dugan PR, he also provides consulting services to a variety of nonprofits across the state of New Hampshire. Jennifer and Chris, thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you very much, Bob, for that welcome. Really appreciate that. Really excited to be here with you today, all of you, and talk about what is one of my favorite topics. So you're going to hear from me for the first part, and then from Chris a little bit later on. So I wanted to just start about to kind of set up what we're going to talk about today, which is a national initiative called Reframing Aging, which really is focusing on telling a new story about aging. So Reframing Aging is a long-term social change endeavor to change how we talk about aging to include a more complete picture. So again, next slide, please. This is a very large topic. So today we're going to provide an overview and just kind of a broad picture of what we mean when we say reframing aging or telling a new story about aging. But I promise at the end, if your interest is piqued and you want to go further and learn more, we will provide resources for how you can connect more deeply to this information. So I want to start with, why do we need a new story about aging? And so you can see on this slide representations of our population in 1960 and what is projected to look like in 2060. So I am guessing that everybody here in this virtual room today is well aware of the demographic shifts that are occurring in our population, the aging of our population, not just here in New Hampshire, but nationally. So generally, when we hear about these changing demographics, this population shift, we hear about the growing number of people who will need support and connection. We often hear about, fears of burden on society or systems that won't be able to handle these population shifts. And so while we do need to prepare and think about how our systems will meet this demographic shift, it's not a complete story. What we're not hearing in this conversation about the changing of our demographics is we're not hearing about the many more healthy, active, and productive people who are working well into their 60s, 70s, and beyond. We're not hearing mixed in with the potential challenges that we're going to face as a society. We're not hearing anything about the opportunities or the contributions that older people bring to society. So coming out of this Reframing Aging initiative, there's growing recognition that the way that we as experts, individuals who either work or volunteer in the field of aging, or advocates who are advocating for older people in their communities and at the state level, how we're talking about aging isn't getting the results that we hope for. We're not getting those policy changes and shifts that we're hoping for. We're not garnering the public support. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research done in this initiative that helps us understand why that is. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Reframing Aging Initiative is a national initiative. We in New Hampshire are lifting up the Reframing Aging work through the Alliance for Healthy Aging. And I just wanted to spend a moment on the fact that this initiative and what I'm going to talk about in terms of what we understand about older people's, about the general public's understanding or perceptions of older people, it all comes from research. And so several leading aging organizations nationally came together to fund an organization called the Frameworks Institute that really is a communications think tank, if you will, out of Washington, D.C., to perform a variety of research tactics to understand not only how the general public thinks about aging, how we talk about aging impacts that, but also to test new ways of talking about aging. So what you see here on this slide is just a variety of, it shows the variety of different research techniques that were taken throughout the work of the Reframing Aging work early on. I'm not going to go into this in detail. As I said, for those of you who really love, most people are like, just give me the 2-sentence overview of research and I'm good. As I said at the end, we'll give a little bit of a places where you can connect if somebody really likes research and you want to dig in deeper. What I really want to point to is that, as I said, what I'm talking about, what we're learning is research driven. The research was done across the country with a relatively large sample size. So we're looking at over 12,000 individuals, included a variety of techniques, including on the street interviews. And actually some of those on the street interviews actually happened here in New Hampshire during the research phase. And so I wanted to note one particular aspect of the research before I move on from from the research behind the initiative. And you may, if you've heard anything about reframing aging, you may have been, you may have heard that, there's some recommendations out there that we think about the terms that we use when we refer to older people. And so I want to talk about a research study that really is where that is coming from. And so the Frameworks Institute did a study that looked at the association between terms such as elder, senior citizen, older person, older adult, and looked at that in terms of the general public's association with competency related to those terms. And so what they found is generally terms like elder are associated with frailty, memory loss, and least amount of competence, while terms such as older adult and older person are associated with a higher level of competency and really are more reflective of the broad range of aging experience, recognizing that we don't all age in the similar manner. So the recommendation that has come out of the research is to consider to use terms such as older adult or older person, um, favoring them over terms such as elder or senior citizen that are more closely associated with a lack of competence. And so that is just that. It's a recommendation with recognition that there are places and communities where certain terms mean something, and that meaning is very important. And so elder may mean something in a particular community, and it would be important to uphold that and continue to use that term. But just really wanted to share broadly some of the thinking about even how we talk about older people themselves. So next slide, please. So what the research tells us is that generally people have a set view of aging. And I mentioned this earlier, that does not take into account individual differences in how we all age and tends towards an almost, completely negative view of aging. We know also from the research that those that work or volunteer or are more connected to the field of aging tend to have a more complete picture of aging. So what you see here on this slide is really that gap. So, aging experts and advocates tend to think, again, it's not a universal, but tend to think that aging can be positive, that it's a normal process. There tends to be more of an embracing of aging and a recognition that we are all aging. It's all of us. Um, Aging experts and advocates also tend to have an understanding that how we age is driven by social factors, as well as believe that, while many of us may experience decline, there is much that we can do as we age. And so if we look to the other side of this slide, what we know is that the general public tends to think of aging is all bad, all about decline for everyone. And we know that that varies. How I age should be different than how somebody else ages. The general public tends to think in terms of fighting aging. It's something that rather than embrace, we should fight. And we see this a lot in our media, right? So we see this in the advertisements and for products and things that are designed to help us look younger. The general public tends to put older people or aging as another category. It's somebody else. It's not me. I'm not aging. It's somebody else over there. There's that separation. Well, we all know from the moment that we're born, we're all aging. The general public tends to think in terms of how we age is really driven by individual choices. So if I reach my retirement years and I am not, I don't have finances or I'm in poor health, the general perception is that it must be that I made poor choices throughout my life to cause that, as opposed to a general broader recognition that where I live, where I age, where I was raised, all play a factor in how I aged. And finally, the general public tends to think just sort of this overwhelming, we're doomed. There's nothing good about aging. There's nothing we can do. We're all going to get old and we're all going to decline. Next slide, please. So the research, again, kind of doing a high level here, the research doesn't just identify how the general public views. As I said in that original slide, it also looks at and tested new ways of talking about aging in terms of how, did it shift the way the general public thought about aging. And so out of that, there came some recommendations of things we can avoid when we talk about aging, in particular if we're wanting to advance and garner public support of policy changes. And there's also there's things that we want to avoid and there's things that we can advance. So if we look at some of the things we want to avoid, this idea that individual actions are the sole drivers of aging outcomes. We want to avoid solely focusing on aging as the process of decline. So we're not denying that that can happen and does happen, but we want to create a broader picture and acknowledgement that it happens in varying degrees and at varying times for all people. We want to avoid, as I talked about, that positioning older people as a completely separate group and focus on all of us as aging. The next thing I want to talk about is one of the things, so this is common for, I think, many of us who write grants or advocate for older people, is there's a tendency to talk about the changing in our demographic as a crisis. And we've often done this in the past, and I know I've done this a little bit in my own grant writing in previous years, is because we want to create this understanding that this is a big issue and we need to do something now. But what the research tells us, and so you probably heard things like silver tsunami in recent years and things like that, that really are positioning the demographic change in our society as a crisis. But what we've learned through this research is that that doesn't bring people to the table. That doesn't get us support. It does actually quite the opposite. Is if we think about a crisis that big as a tsunami, most people disengage because they think this is too big. There's nothing I can do to make a difference. So they disengage rather than engage. We also want to avoid talking about things in terms of fixed or finite resources. And again, we see this in the advocacy or policy world in terms of, we want to avoid framing things in terms of there's only so many resources, so we need to take from one population to make sure older people have a population. So we don't want to pit an us versus them kind of dynamic. And then we want to avoid talking about ageism as just another ism. And I'm gonna talk about ageism briefly in one moment. So if we go to the advanced slide, the things that we want to advance are really the flip side of what we want to avoid. So I'm going to go through these rather quickly. We want to advance that context shapes decisions and outcomes. We want to advance the idea that future is and can be a time for improvement. So again, thinking about not just decline, but broadening that picture. We want to advance the idea that we're all better off by being inclusive, and that interventions can change outcomes. So there are things that we can do. We also want to advanced solutions and stories. Um, and then we want to be clear to talk about ageism and the impact it has on older people. Next slide, please. So I want to spend a minute, and Chris is going to go a little bit deeper about the impacts of ageism, but I wanted to spend a minute just defining ageism, because we know through the reframing aging process that all of these assumptions and this dominant view of aging leads to ageism across our society. So as we're defining it, ageism is discrimination based on prejudice about age. So ageism can happen to younger people as well as older people. But when ageism is directed at older people, it often involves assumptions that older people are less competent, less attractive, and less vigorous than younger people. And it can have a tremendous negative impact on older people. And again, Chris is going to talk about that in a minute. Just next slide. So I'm just wanted to wrap up my piece before I turn it over to Chris, to acknowledge. So talking about ageism is part of the reframing ageism work. And one of the things that we have learned about ageism is that many people don't even realize or recognize it as an issue or a problem. It's not considered a policy issue, and it's often thought as something that's impossible to address. It's just kind of part of our society. So some of the strategies through the reframing ageism work are to explain that to define ageism and be very clear in explaining how ageism leads to social injustice or unequal treatment. And really begin to talk about some of the biases. And so what I talked about earlier in that general public view of aging are those biases. So we typically talk about, this new narrative, this new story about aging, and include in it a conversation about ageism. And I am going to stop there and turn it over to Chris to talk about that a little bit deeper.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide, please, Kathleen. And good morning, folks. And again, thank you to Kathleen and Bob for having us this morning. Really love talking about this topic, and hopefully we can kind of raise a couple of some awareness as it relates to this. So when you think about all the things that Jennifer had laid out as it relates to ageism, how do then we, as the sort of the public consumer, how are some of our opinions formed, and what's the role in the way that we consume news in that? And we've pulled some examples out in the slide below to kind of give you a sense of what is reported, and then what you're hearing and reading and seeing may very well lead to one's own view of ageism. And we're not going to talk a lot about pop culture or advertising today, but when you think about some of that exists out there, whether it is a greeting card that's supposed to be humorous, describing different stages of aging, or even the insurance commercial where Dr. Rick tells us not to be like our parents when we purchase insurance. There's this image out there that we really want to try to reverse. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about some observations that we have, and maybe start a conversation around how this might be different. So no closer than, ripped from the headlines on a daily basis. And we pulled out some examples here for you to all look at. And in the first bullet, it's a really favorable story when you think about it, right? So we're in the midst of COVID-19, and we're making sure that people get their COVID-19 inoculation. However, the way that the reporter decided to report that, and again, I've worked in the media before, and I know that very often somebody else writes the headline and then somebody else writes the story. But the image you're taking away from this is these elderly locals are now fully vaccinated. Well, what defines elderly, and what image are you getting right away as a consumer of news? And then Jennifer talked a little bit about how ageism tend to lend itself to crisis language when we discuss ageism. And when you look at the other headlines that are in this slide that we have, there really is two things juxtaposed. One, there's older people that are being described, and two, it's really written in a crisis, oh my God, emergency language. Caring for a rapidly aging state, the silver tsunami, as Jennifer mentioned earlier. And then the last bullet is from a local sort of think tank, and they use words like staggering trend, increasingly aged, and soaring population. And one of the terms personally that I really notice and recognize, and maybe you all will after this, is often New Hampshire is characterized as rapidly aging. We're all aging at the same rate, the same level at the same time. So when you say that, you're giving people a sense there's this boulder rolling down a hill. And rather than saying that New Hampshire is a place where people want to come, retire, and prosper, they're making that as a negative. So hopefully when we talk about this a little bit, we can kind of reverse some of this negative language as we're talking about this. Next slide, please, Kathleen. So this is a really in-your-face quote, but I wanted to use it to kind of emphasize some of the things that happened in the media, particularly around the COVID-19 coverage. So anybody who watched Channel 9 or consumed the Union Leader or others, generally on a daily basis, they kind of divided people that had COVID-19 into two categories: people that were over 60 and people that were under 60, as somehow that was a dividing line. But it also tended to get the community thinking, well, COVID-19, while it does have physical impacts on older adults, it really seems to be trending towards that. And one of the things that played out on a daily basis, not just nationally, but in New Hampshire, was kind of this divide as it related to, this is a serious, health crisis that we're all facing. How is it impacting older adults? And it really created kind of that us and them, that otherism that Jennifer was talking about. And it played it out on a daily basis. And I think, again, it provided the consumer of news, or the person in the general public, a perception of aging, what it means, and how negative that can be. So again, whether you're reading something in print, seeing it on television, it's kind of creating this image that you have of aging and older adults. And we also recognize that this is something that is sort of built up over time, and we're not going to change it overnight. But the reframing aging process is exciting, because it's beginning to get us to think a little bit about the words we use, the way that we characterize things, and how we can hopefully move forward in a better, more positive fashion. Because again, as Jennifer pointed out very well, the more crisis information that we use and the darker we put this in, it really does tend to make people disengage. And that's the opposite of what we need to have happen in New Hampshire. Next slide, please, Kathleen. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I wanted to kind of give a perspective a little bit, and I won't get too wonky, but the AP style book, and I'm a former journalism student, so for my freshman year at college, we were all drilled and educated on the AP style book, short for Associated Press. And what the AP style book does is give journalists and students kind of the guidance and the framework about how one writes or characterizes a news story. And what's really exciting about the AP style guide, and if you're either a writer or a consumer of news, or kind of a journalism, a failed journalist / geek like myself, you look forward to the new edition of the AP style book. And what's really exciting to myself and Jennifer is that for the first time in a long time, both new students to the field and current journalists are kind of getting a sense of how reporters to report on issues of aging. And there's some really good tips in here about, word usage. Let's be specific. Hopefully when you're reading news, you'll see this, but rather than calling somebody an older adult or a senior, put their age in there. And again, I think most reporters do that, but I think it's really important that you put somebody's age in there. And that way you let the reader determine what they want to determine, not telling them that somebody is elderly or vulnerable or something like that. And also really important that we all have a way that we'd like to be described. And sometimes the enemy is us, right? Sometimes older adults or even younger adults will characterize themselves in a certain way. But to the extent that we can, particularly when news is being reported on, and hopefully it's objective news, you're writing a story so that the reader or viewer or whomever can consume it at their own level and sort of understand it and make their own assumptions from that. The bullets on the bottom are pretty important. And then I think the distinction I just want to point out, and Jennifer's really good about this when she presents on this, is that in some cultures and societies, the word elder is used in particular. So there is a distinction between that, but I just want to point that out to people that sometimes an elder is a term, maybe it's in a church, maybe it's in a tribal situation where people use that as a term of endearment and it's appropriate. But we're talking about kind of the bigger picture. Next slide, please, Kathleen. So again, I love all these slides, but this one in particular, because what we've been talking about this morning is that words and image really does matter, right? So it's not just phraseology, it's that it creates an impression, and it really can have some really negative downstream impacts about how older adults or seniors might be perceived in the workforce and in other places. So in the workplace, it is a challenge for some older adults either to go into the workforce or to stay in the workforce based on maybe preconceived notions of their abilities in that. And ironically, at a time where many sectors are struggling for workers, employers that are ahead of the curve are creating age-friendly opportunities and embracing experienced professionals to come back into the workforce. Same thing in the community. When you think about, how most communities are built and kind of the bedrock of what a community is, it's volunteers, it's people like that. Not to put people in a particular box so that it minimizes their contribution, and highlighting that. And something the Alliance for Healthy Aging does frequently is talks about the role that older adults play across the state as volunteers, as elected officials and others, and really the positive role that they play. Same thing in the policy arena. It's really important that those who write laws, those who determine budgets, have a sense of what this means by investing in those types of things so that all of us can age the way we want to in our communities of choice. Healthcare is a really good one. And I'll use a personal anecdote for a moment, if I might. So my father passed away a couple of years ago, but in the last couple of years of his life, I was the person who brought him to the doctor's office. And my father would categorize and catalog things to ask the doctor when we would go in. And he was a really good healthcare consumer when he was in his 80s. But quite often, and I didn't see this as necessarily the doctor trying to be negative, but sometimes when my father would ask about things, the doctor would attribute some of that to, well, Bob, you're 83 years old, and this is sort of how you're supposed to feel. And I don't know that the doctor was doing it intentionally, but if we're creating this image of aging, and if we're allowing, the people around us in the medical community to say, well, it's 84, you're supposed to be sore, then I really think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So that's why if we can change the language, change the whole perception that we have about older adults, we can do a lot. And it really does matter. I mean, this slide here shows you there's real impacts and there's real consequences for ageism as it relates to different parts of our society. And we talked a little about the media. The one thing I will say, and I'm going to stray a little bit into another area that I work in because I work in several areas with older adults. Often when the reporters are looking for stories, they will want to get the extreme. They'll want to write something about an 89-year-old who might have achieved something physically, right? Or he or she might have run a road race or climbed a mountain or something like that. And while that's an important story and a great story to tell, it's not really representative of the whole work of aging, right? So I think if we want to create a more balanced image, we're talking about aging as a sector. And there's people that age at different levels. They feel differently as they age, but we all should be able to age in our own way. But hopefully when the field of aging or older adults are covered, it's indicative of all of the people that are aging, not just the extremes in one way or the other. Next slide, please, Kathleen. So Jennifer made this pitch at the beginning, and I'll make the same pitch myself. We are always looking forward to going on and talking to groups of any size and talking about what this means. And there's even some opportunities that we can do exercises and work with you if there's language that you have that you'd like us to look at and talk about ways in which you might be able to communicate a little differently. There's also some really awesome tools that you can avail yourselves of, and there's a couple of websites here that are really good, and it really helps to give you a sense as both a consumer or a representative of whatever organization you're part of on how you might sort of do your own personal reframing, maybe looking at the types of ways in which you communicate and how you might be able to do that differently in a way that is more indicative of what we're talking about this morning. But again, we're always open to that. I believe that's, oh, I have one more after this, Kathleen, if you can move to that, that would be super. So this really is a movement, and it's a movement that we can all be part of, and it's a movement that nobody is excluded from in any way. But I really do think that, healthy and strong communities value everybody in the community. And quite often, due to ageism, the contributions, but also the potential of older adults can be overlooked. So part of the reason we think this is so important is that we're all viewing where these resources are. There's a tremendous opportunity that our state has to avail themselves of the fact that we have the second oldest population in the country. We have a tremendous amount of older adults who come to the state, they want to retire here. Maybe they want to donate to nonprofits. Maybe they want to volunteer. Maybe they want to join the workplace. So rather than see that as a negative, let's maybe flip the script a bit and see it as a positive. And again, that we can all work together, join a movement to make stronger and healthier communities that we can all live and thrive in. And if you go to the next slide, Kathleen, I think that is our final one. This is information in case you want to get in touch with us. We have social media, so I'd be remiss if I didn't say to follow us, like us if you would like, share information that is on there. And I do think that we have left some time for some questions if you would like. Thank you for listening this morning. It's been wonderful to be here.
Are there some questions for Jennifer and Chris? I don't see any hands in the air, so thank you, Jennifer and Chris, for an excellent, very timely presentation. A lot of great information there. We sure appreciate your participation in our annual meeting. You are most welcome to stay with us for our business meeting, but we understand if you have other obligations to attend to. So thanks again for coming, and thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you, Bob.
The next order of business is to approve the minutes of the annual meeting of April 2022. Those minutes have been posted on the GCSCC website, and I hope that all who wish to do so have had the opportunity to review them. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Is there a motion? Is that Christine? Yes, thank you. Okay, Christine Saint-Laurent. Second? Hey, Natalie, thank you. Are there any comments, questions, or discussion? Okay, all those who approve acceptance of the April 22 minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 If you do not approve, signify by saying no. I hear no no's, so the minutes are approved. My
Bob, you're
pleasure
muted.
now. Got it. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to present the 2023 GCSCC slate of officers and board members for election. There are a total of 4 existing board members who are being recommended for nominated for a second 3-year for additional terms. The first category nominated for a second 3-year term from 2023 to 2026 are Dean Cashman of Lebanon and Lori Fortini, also of Lebanon. And nominated for a third 3-year term, also 2023 through 2026, are myself, Bob Mew of Littleton, and Martha Richards of Holderness. nominated for a first term as officers. We have Bill Garrity of Hanover as president, Dean Cashman, also of Lebanon, as vice president, Samantha Norrie of Littleton as treasurer, and continuing to serve as secretary is Martha Richards of Holderness. Board of Directors members continuing to fill their current terms are Neil Castaldo of Hanover, Bill Garrity of Hanover, Bill Kartek of Bridgewater, Shauna Kimball of North Haverhill, Craig Labore of Grantham, Steve Marion of Hanover, Doug Menzies of Littleton, Natalie Murphy of Bridgewater, Samantha Norrie of Littleton, and Christine St. Laurent of Campton. I'd welcome a motion of this slate of officers and directors be accepted as presented.
So move.
I believe that was Lori. Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Bill Kartek, thank you. Okay. Is there any further discussion? Are there any nominations from the floor? I hear none. All those in favor of accepting the 2023 GCSCC slate of officers and directors, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. And I hear no no's. Thank you very much, and thank you to our board members and officers for their commitment to GCSCC and its work. At this point in time, I'd like to invite Bill Garrity, chair of our 2022 half-century campaign, say a few words about the campaign.
Thanks, Bob. Last year at this time, we were in the midst of our $1 million campaign and our 50th anniversary year. I spoke with you during the 20 annual meeting about GCSCC's history, organizational needs, and campaign goals. I'm pleased to report that we exceeded our goal and raised $1,161,677. So I want everyone to pat themselves on the back for a moment. Well done. To raise $1 million in 1 year was a stretch goal and took hard work of our employees, our dedication of our board, and the generous support of community members throughout our, thanks to all. Funds raised are being applied to the 4 key areas of our operations: sustaining and expanding our core services, ensuring ongoing support for our clients, providing appropriate wages and benefits to staff, and implementing new programming to meet the needs of today's older adults. We're investing in capital needs at our 8 senior centers and administrative office building. We're upgrading technology, a key to today's wired world, expanding community outreach to raise awareness about our programs, services, and how to access them. GCSCC's mission is the same as it was when the organization was formed in 1972. Yet we have many challenges today, including staffing shortages like everyone else out there, increased costs of essential items such as food, gas, and supplies, and an increased demand for our services as the population ages. Fundraising efforts as the half-century campaign ensured we can continue to meet the need in our communities without denying services to any qualified individuals and without implementing a wait list. As costs increase, we need to continue to focus on fundraising from various resources such as grants, businesses, and individuals. We have a strong base of donors. We made many new friends this past year who contributed. We need to continue to share information on our program and the needs of our clients to enhance our visibility to potential donors and volunteers. I want to thank you all for making a successful campaign possible through your commitment. And don't forget to ask and develop new friends for this coming year. I'm good, Bob. Anyone else has any questions or?
Okay, I don't hear any questions for Bill. Thank you, Bill, for your creativity, hard work, and for keeping the board and staff informed of the progress of the campaign throughout the campaign. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome Dean Cashman to present the financial report.
Thanks, Bob. The unaudited financials for fiscal year 2022 are on the screen and also available in the annual report, which is on our website, gcscc.org. The audited financials will be available on the website by June 1st. As Bill mentioned, the fundraising campaign was nothing but a success. We're also lucky to have some COVID-specific one-time funding opportunities that have helped maintain our financial stability. And we've been able to grow our investments to ensure we have the funds available to meet our goals and increase wages each year, addressing capital needs rather than deferring maintenance. In funding the gap, programming expenses, our annual contracted dollars from state and government sources are depleted each year. So all that being said, we're very financially sound for fiscal year 2022 and going forward. Thanks, Bob. And I'll take questions if there are any.
Any questions for Dean? Okay, thank you, Dean. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome our Executive Director, Kathleen Vasconcelos, to present the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. 2022 was a special year for the Grafton County Senior Citizens Council. We celebrated our 50th anniversary with events held throughout the county. And as Bill noted, we raised more than $1 million through our half-century campaign. 2022 was a year to remember how our organization began in 1972, to celebrate all that has been accomplished during the past 50 years, and take action to ensure we are able to continue to serve older adults and disabled adults for decades to come. GCSCC was formed by 14 community members in Lebanon who set up a nonprofit organization that at the time was called the Lebanon Senior Citizens Council. The group established a Meals on Wheels program and soon expanded to offer transportation services and community lunches as well. We now operate 8 senior centers. We're the fiscal agent for the RSVP Volunteer Center and AmeriCorps Senior Project, and the ServiceLink Resource Center of Grafton County. We serve residents of every town in the county, about 6,000 people annually. Our mission remains the same, as do those core programs first started decades ago, and our appreciation for and reliance on community partnerships also continues to this day. In 1972, the very first meeting of our organization was hosted by the First Congregational Church in Lebanon and organized by the University of New Hampshire. The first meals we delivered to homebound adults were prepared at Mary Hitchcock Memorial Hospital. Early funding was provided by the United Way, and our first meal site outside of Lebanon was held at the Masonic Lodge in Canaan. Partners remain a critical aspect of our operations. It's impossible to imagine our senior centers without them. Our partner organizations provide exercise and music classes, blood pressure and foot clinics, donations of food and equipment, and so much more. If I try to name them all, I will surely miss some. So there are just so many. So I will simply say thank you to all of our partners who show their dedication to our communities through their daily actions. I would also like to thank our 462 volunteers who, just like the 14 individuals who formed our organization in 1972, give their time in service to others. Our volunteers last year donated nearly 19,000 hours of their valuable time to lead exercise classes, prepare and deliver meals, answer phone at our senior centers, call to check on the well-being of homebound adults, and countless other tasks that they perform with smiles on their faces. Our volunteers brighten the days of those they serve, and we are most grateful to all of you for your service. 2022 was also a year of transition for our organization as we fully opened our senior centers for indoor meals and activities while continuing to offer programs that were implemented during the pandemic. This includes grab-and-go meals and virtual activities such as book clubs and music lessons. While facing staffing shortages, which is not a challenge unique to GCSCC, we met the needs of a growing population of aging adults in our region. Last year, we provided nearly 200,000 meals, nearly 11,000 rides on our lift-equipped buses, outreach and social services on nearly 5,000 occasions, social, wellness, and educational opportunities that were participated in more than 14,000 times, and more than $500,000 in cost savings for Medicare beneficiaries during the 2022 Part D open enrollment period. Those numbers are impressive, as are the employees who do the work every day. Thank you to all of them for not only the work that they do, but how they do it, by treating each of our participants with kindness and respect. Looking ahead, our Spring Fling 5K walk run to support GCSCC is coming up, and I invite you all to participate. It's going to be held on May 20th at the Horse Meadow Senior Center in North Haverhill. There will be more information on our website soon. That's gcscc.org, or you can contact your local senior center for more information. So in closing, I thank you all for taking the time to attend this meeting, for your volunteer service, your financial contributions, your partnerships. Ensuring the well-being of our community members is truly a team effort, and I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I hope you will allow me to take the opportunity, if I may, of just saying a few parting words as I step down as GCSCC board president. When I first embarked upon this 3-year adventure, I borrowed from Hippocrates, my guiding principle: first, do no harm. And I hope that I've lived up to that modest goal. It's been a unique privilege to help lead this amazing organization with dedicated, selfless, and endlessly creative employees, board and committee members who are thoughtful, insightful, and possessed of many talents, and a huge complement of energetic and caring volunteers. The opportunity to work closely with a person of Kathleen's caliber has been one of the best experiences of my life, and I look forward to our continued association. Thank you all for your support and all that you do for GCSCC.
You're muted, Bob.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll welcome any additional comments or questions, and I'll call on Bill. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to make a few comments. Anyone who knows Bob knows that he's been a very active volunteer for numerous nonprofit organizations. Some of his roles have been with the First Congressional Church of Littleton, the Board of Directors of Community Health Services, Troop Committee Chair and Scoutmaster of the Boy Scouts, Board Member and Secretary of the Littleton Area Chamber of Commerce, and Trustee of the Mayhew Program. He is a 10-year member and past president of Littleton Rotary Club, and he was named Littleton Volunteer of the Year in 2017. Bob joined our board back in June 2015 to fill the term of a board member who passed away. At the annual meeting in April 2017, he began his first 3-year term. In 2020, he began his second 3-year term. And this year, he will begin his final 3-year term, which will end in 2026. Basic math, you can see how he angled to get some extra years in there. Bob has served as our board secretary from 2016 to 2018, vice president 2018 to 2020, and president 20 to 22, and then an additional year as president for 2022 to 23. I met Bob in 2018 when I joined the search committee to hire our current executive director. During our search committee discussions, it became noticeably clear to me that Bob was enthusiastic and sincere to make sure our organization's future was going to be positive with our new director. Since that time, with the challenges of COVID and all the other bumps on the road, Bob is a great leader and committed board member. Although Bob will not be an officer, he will continue as a board member for one more term. His knowledge and continuous commitment will be a great asset for our board, staff, and clients. I'm extremely glad Bob will be around to help with challenges and to give his perspective. Bob, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for all you've done and continuing to be a member with us. This is where
Thank you, Bill, for your
you hear the standing, it's a standing ovation, Bob.
thank you, Bill, for your kind words. Are there any additional comments or questions? Okay, if there or any additional business to be brought before the meeting? No. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Anybody? Martha, thank you. How about a second? Bill, thank you. Is anyone opposed to adjourning the meeting at this time? Okay. Hearing no objection, I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you for your continued support of GCSCC.
Thank you so much.